So welcome to this session, and I'm delighted to have four people who are now practicing journalists, and like some of those of you in the audience who are on the way to becoming journalists, they've experienced the pitfalls, the highs, the lows, and the challenges of getting there. What we'll do is we'll ask each of them very briefly to describe where they've come from and how they've got to be where they are, just very briefly, and then we'll have a conversation about the challenges of becoming a journalist, and then we'll open it up for lots of questions from you about that topic. So firstly, Ben, very quickly, how did you get to be where you are now?
Well, actually, probably through a relatively traditional pathway, which is that I edited the student newspaper at my university many years ago now. So that was, it's called Semper Floreat. It's got quite a proud history as a student publication, actually. Alumnus include John Birmingham and P.R. Inky Stevenson. It's a sort of very old school Queensland left-wing journalist from the 30s and 40s. So I had a year editing the student newspaper up there in Brisbane, and then pretty soon after that I happened across the arts editor for the Courier Mail up there at the time, which was Rosemary Sorensen. She's currently the director of the Bendigo Writers Festival, actually, and doing a fine job there. And she asked me to come and start writing for her. So I became an arts critic and freelance arts writer for the Courier Mail for the next 5 or 6 years. And it was through that I started to build up my profile, I suppose. And I then realised that there wasn't a whole lot of difference between being an arts writer and, say, a theatre critic to writing about politics. You know, you've got actors, you've got scripts, you've got sets, costumes and props. And so I started writing some political commentary, and through that I was asked to come on for a brand new online journal called New Matilda, which was just starting up at the time, and I started off as their national politics writer, and I've been there ever since.
Thank you. Ben Eltham and Monique Hall, tell us about your pathway to becoming a journalist.
Mine seems a lot less exciting than Ben's now. I graduated uni, and just before I graduated, everyone kind of freaked me out by saying there's no jobs in journalism, nobody's going to get a job. So I decided I'd start applying a little bit early, and ended up getting a job at a country paper called the Wimmera Mail Times in Horsham. So I packed my bags and moved up there for a year and had a really great year covering everything from state politics, local councils, agriculture, footy, everything, as you do at a country paper. And then after that I came back to Melbourne and did some comms work for the state government, things like media releases and speeches and media packs, those sorts of things. And then at that time I became a cadet at HWT. So we, for a year, rotate through all their different papers in Victoria. So that included the Herald Sun, the Weekly Times, the Geelong Advertiser, MX, and the Leader Group. And I finished that in March and have since been a full-time reporter at the Herald Sun as a general news journo.
Thanks, Monique. Michael Roddan, tell us about your pathway.
I guess mine seems a little bit less deliberate and more lucky. I got to the end of my undergrad and I decided on doing a master's in journalism. And about 6 months into that, I kind of got nervous and started to feel very old, so I started just doing internships wherever I could. And I kind of fell into business journalism thanks to a little bit of knowledge about like finance and economics that I had. I worked for the Anglican Diocese. They have a newspaper and a media team. And I sort of talked up my ability to work in video, which was mostly a lie. But they took me on, and about 6 months after that, a job opened up at the Business Spectator. And I applied, and I was lucky enough to get it, and it was swallowed up by the Australian. So now I'm part of a bigger organisation. But yeah, so it was mostly luck, and then sort of working out a little niche, but probably mainly luck.
We might talk about the role that luck plays in all of this, because I'm sure it's a factor for all of us in some way. Kirsten, Robb.
I would say it's very similar to Michael, a bit of luck, bit of lying about my video skills. I'd actually come from a filmmaking background, but essentially I was a director and I was working at a video store and telling people I was a filmmaker, and wasn't actually making any real money or anything like that. So I wanted to get a job that paid money, and I thought, hey, journalism, I don't know anything about that. If I'd known what I know now, I might not have put those two things together, money and journalism, in my mind. But yeah, basically I did an internship at the end of my master's degree. I studied the Melbourne Masters as well, and it was at Channel 9, and they liked me. They asked me to stay on longer. I impressed an editorial assistant there who got me a job at The Leader. I started working for The Leader and for the Herald Sun in the property sections. After about a year, I got an email from my idol, Sophie Black, and she asked me to throw my hat in the ring for a job at Smart Company, which was a business publication, which I knew nothing about business at the time, probably a lot less than you, Michael. And yeah, ended up moving over to Smart Company and did quite a bit of video with them as well, with yourself, Andrew. And just recently I was offered a job as a part of Fairfax and The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald as a data journalist. Again, I didn't know that much about data when they offered me the job, but bluffed my way through, and now here I am.
Well, thank you. That's a really lovely summary of all of the different ways in which you've got into journalism. And there's a recurring theme, this sense of bluff that's creeping in with all of you. Is there a bit of bluff required to get to where you are?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think there's you have to bluff to a certain extent in everything that you do in life, and a lot of companies make it out like they're looking for people with something like 5 years experience, and that your skills are going to have to be polished. But in reality, no one really has all these skills that are in high demand, like video, like social, like data. You know, it's still a really new field, so they're going to take whatever they can get. And if you have some experience in it, it's usually better than none. And I think people are willing to, you know, lower their expectations if you show enough, you know, eagerness to, you know, expand those skills.
Yeah, and you can very quickly bluff your way through if you realise that you know slightly more than the person who's employing you. So if you, I mean, I guess that's the essence of bluffing, is just pretending that you know much more.
This has never been more true, has it, generationally? And my students will attest to this. There are lots of things that my students know much more about than I do. And when it comes to technical skills, many times they're way ahead. So you have that advantage generationally over the people employing you.
You see, it's not a bluff, Andrew. I'm really good. See what I did there?
Modest too.
No, I mean, that's the point, is that I think a bit of confidence does help. But, you know, ideally, if you're getting to a situation where you are getting an interview or your work is in front of an editor, then, you know, you've got to that point. So I think you should have a little bit of confidence in your work that it's got you that far. Anyone who's ever worked in journalism knows that the biggest part of the job really is the ability to rapidly acquire knowledge. So the ability to talk to people, to find out who are the knowledgeable people in a particular field, to find out the information that people don't want you to know. Those are transferable skills, I think, across all fields of journalism, whatever medium you're working in.
Yeah. Did universities prepare you well for the task of being a journalist and finding a job? Oh God, Michael, the way you're looking at me, I'm scared of the answer. What's coming?
Oh no, there's just a couple of people from the university in the field. There's Jen, who did teach me a little bit. So, in a lot of ways, yes, and in a lot of ways, no. There's only so much that school can prepare you for real life. I think it gives you the sort of base skills that are really necessary for a job. Things like writing, sentence construction, grammar, skills here and there, and you know, initial contacts, because as a young person you don't have any contacts that aren't also under 25 years old. But in another respect, you know, the first day, I remember like my first day as an intern, I was just like completely flummoxed about how to actually produce a piece of writing in an hour, you know, and so in that way, you know, like 3 months ago, I think that I've improved a lot from the prior 3 months, and then in another 3 months' time, I'm amazed at like how much more I've known, and essentially, university is good.
Correct answer.
I think Michael's kind of right. There's some things that you've got to do when you're a journalist that unis just can't teach you. Like, they can't send you on to do a door knock or you know, they can't send you to a PM press conference when you don't really know what he's going to be talking about that day. Like, there's just some things that you've just got to throw yourself into and kind of learn as you go, and you learn really quickly. So, and I think everyone's in that same boat regardless of where they went to uni or how much study they did.
Can I ask you, how do you maximise the opportunities of university to better prepare you for looking for work?
Try to get published, I think. Yeah, it's probably the best. I mean, you're actually writing these assignments, you're putting in the work. Half the time they're really good, if you are good, and they should be, you know, you should push them to try to get someone to publish them.
Did all of you guys study journalism, did you? See, I didn't actually even study journalism. I studied science, actually. So, but I actually think that was really great training to be a journalist, because I learned a whole bunch of skills, like, you know, how to read a graph. You know, all of a sudden that's a big thing in journalism, or, you know, doing data. And I think I also learnt some pretty important thinking skills around the scientific method, you know. And later on in my journalism, I went on to cover a lot of climate change and climate policy, and that was pretty handy, actually, to have a science degree for that stuff.
Well, in fact, there are these different schools of thought about journalism training, and many people say that the best way to do it is to do it as a postgrad on top of a specialist undergrad degree, so that you've got that basis of knowledge to build on. Those of us who teach undergrad journalism degrees, you know, find that a little challenging, obviously. But there aren't enough science journalists, are there?
Look, I think there would probably be only a couple of science journalists working in Australia today. You know, probably Robb and Williams at the ABC, and I think New Scientist has still got a Melbourne bureau. There's not a whole lot of people, you know, and it's a complex field. It's difficult to do science journalism well. It's very difficult, I think, you know, to engage with the scientists properly. So
in answering this question, you want to be a journalist. What are the other pathways? You know, what are the other specialties that aren't being really addressed in mainstream journalism where there is potential for work?
I think that definitely opens a door if you've got some sort of background like you did, Ben, something else that isn't just, not to say anything against doing undergrad and then going on to postgrad or just going up through undergrad, but I do think people paid attention to me a little bit more because I said I'd studied film. I think they were like, okay, well, she's got these skills. And I think a lot of people in my master's course when I did it had come from science, social work, law backgrounds, really, really diverse backgrounds, which I think made for a really interesting course for starters. But I think people just generally maybe paid attention to those people when they applied for jobs because it wasn't just all I wanted to do my whole life is journalism.
And Michael, your area is business. That's an obvious area where there are jobs.
Yeah, I was lucky in the fact that I spent a lot of time looking into things like political economy at university. It wasn't a focus of my degree, but I just did one course and then just kept on reading it. And I think it's like a misnomer to think that doing a structured course is the only way to learn something, because you learn so much just from reading the paper, reading books in your own time. Like courses that give you readings and textbooks and everything like that, I can't remember opening one of them. But when you open things that you're curious about, you actually spend a great deal of your time learning about it properly because you have shown like a curiosity for it. And I think it's really just important that even if you are just in a broad like arts or science degree, to plough into other areas that really grab your attention, because it's the only way to actually build an interest in something that sets you apart from someone who can just, I don't know, communicate well.
Yeah, that word curiosity.
I can't.
The word curiosity. It's a key word in this, isn't it? Having curiosity and having the confidence to follow it and explore it and go where it leads you.
I think it comes down to the fact that it's okay to ask questions in whatever sphere you're in. Just ask the question, whether it be, hey, can I have a job? Hey, can you read this article? Hey, I've got this kind of idea. I know you don't know who I am, but I want to pitch you this story idea. Just ask the questions. And then on the other end, ask the people that you want to get the information. Never hold back a question. Even if you think it's a little bit stupid, just ask the question.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like in my university degree, there's a structured internship program that everyone has to do to complete the degree. But I was just really antsy, and so I just emailed a bunch of editors to ask me if they could take me on as a day a week. And it paid off. I got a position at BRW magazine, and working with them in the Financial Review. And they were like, I think they're keen to have people on that actually want to be there, rather than just doing it as part of like a structured thing. Shows initiative, I guess, but you know, it is just putting yourself out there and willing to be rejected, because you're probably going to be rejected quite a bit.
Now, Monique, you did something that is often described as one of the best ways to get into journalism, in that you went to a country newspaper, and the thing about a country newspaper is that you're forced to do everything.
Yes.
And it's rather scary if you were to put a byline on every story, because you'd probably end up writing at least half the book or the publication each week. So what was that like as a learning environment?
I really, really enjoyed moving to the country. I'm a country girl originally. I grew up in Wonthaggi, but had never been to Horsham before I did my job interview. Had no idea about cropping or anything, no agricultural knowledge pretty much, but decided if I was going to get a job, moving to the country for a year would be a good way to do it. And I actually think it was probably the best thing I could have done, because you have to be across everything that's happening in that town. But in a country area, you're also really accountable. If you write something that somebody doesn't like, or if you write something that they love, they'll come up and tell you. They'll come into the office, they'll see you in the supermarket, and they feel like it's not your paper, it's their paper. It's their town, it's their lives, and what you write does affect them. So they're very forthright in telling you. And I love that. I love sort of that accountability, and I think it really sets you up for kind of having a sense of integrity as a journalist. And equally, you get the other side where they also trust you, so they'll tell you some really great stories, and they'll share their lives with you, and they'll give you a call or see you in the pub and tell you something, and it's kind of an honour in that sense that they're willing to share all that stuff with you.
Yeah, I sometimes think that city-based journalism students look on the country, a country gig like that paper at Horsham, with horror. But, I'm a country person too. I think it's a lovely environment in which to learn and practice the craft and learn the skills. So would you recommend that to others?
I would recommend it. I don't think it's an easy path to take. You move into a town where you don't know anyone, and in terms of country papers, I think I've never been busier than when I was there in terms of the number of stories that I was producing a day. And as you say, sometimes your name is the only thing in the news section of the paper. So it's a really good training ground, and I think had I have not done that, I probably wouldn't have gotten my job in the city. So if I had just walked in and tried to get a job in the city, I don't think it would have happened for me without that country grounding.
Can you replicate that experience of the all-rounder, doing everything in a job that isn't in that environment? How do you create that some other way?
I don't know if you'd... Well, private media definitely... definitely, I would recommend working for an organisation like private media.
Now, private media is the publisher of
Crikey, Smart Company. It was the publisher of Property Observer. The Daily Review is the publisher of Women's Agenda, The Mandarin.
Owned by Eric Beecher, founded by Stephen Mayne.
Yeah. Tiny team. Really, really small. I think Crikey probably has the most journalists of everybody, and they have maybe, in the office, maybe 2 or 3 or 4. We would do social media. We would write 5 stories before noon, then we would tweet them out and Facebook them, then we would publish them in the back end. We'd do video, we'd read our own comments and moderate them, everything, and it was incredible experience. It was very hard, but it was incredible experience. So I do think, especially those sort of smaller publications, new media organisations do offer those opportunities in the city. Yeah.
I think it's increasingly the way it's going as well for young people is you're asked to do a whole lot of different things because you do have all those skills. And like the director of our university says that everyone who gets a job from our degree is employed in sort of small new media things where you're asked to do pretty much everything. And so in a lot of respects, it's not a very glamorous job because you are a workhorse, but you do pick up a buttload of skills.
Yeah, and you become absolutely indispensable because nobody else can do the things that you're doing.
Yeah, you'd hope so.
That's hopefully the plan.
No one can
Yeah.
do them. No.
And there's a kind of sense of that too at the Herald and Weekly Times, isn't there, Monique, where in your cadetship you get taken through the wide range of publications, you know, Weekly Times, MX when it was operating.
Yeah,
Herald
it's
Leader and the Herald Sun.
It's very different. I went from the Weekly Times to MX. That's how my rotations went, and it was like getting a slap in the face, going from agriculture to the younger, funner, not funner, but you know, more light-hearted kind of demographic that was MX. So, but the other thing I liked about that is being an all-rounder and doing everything. You kind of get to find out what you like most. I'm someone who sort of says, do everything until you find what you really, really love. Like, don't say no to anything. And I think that's another good thing about trying everything, because then you work out what you really like, what you're good at, and what you don't like so much.
And it's what an editor loves, isn't it? The editor wants somebody who is up for anything, will give anything a go, and the last thing you want as an editor is a naysayer, someone who's going to say, oh, I can't do that, or I'm not interested in it. They really want self-starters who are going to grab any opportunity.
I think, yeah, I would like to get to the point where if my editor had a last-minute story that needs to be done, and he looked around the newsroom and said, who is going to do this story? Who can I trust to do the story? Oh, there's Monique. Let's give it to her. Like, I'd like for him to be able to do that, or for the cause, or whoever it might be. I'd hate for someone to look around and go, oh, Monique doesn't know much about that. We won't give her that story. Just let me have a crack at it.
Okay, well, in a sense, this is all pie in the sky, because you've all got jobs, and there are lots of people here who want jobs. So how do you get one? And is this a plausible approach? This is the advice I sometimes give to our students, is while you're looking for work, match the job searching with the process of writing or doing the story on the thing that most interests you. So in other words, break a story, chase a story, go somewhere where another journalist who's employed doesn't have the time to go, and maximise that strength that you've got, that's time, that a lot of journalists who work in news environments don't have. Is that sound advice or not?
Yeah, I think it is, Andrew. I mean, you heard me in the panel before say that my advice to emerging writers and journalists who want to break in is to break a story. That's what will get you noticed. That's the currency of news. And in the current environment where there's fewer and fewer investigative journalists, and where working journalists are filing 5 stories before lunchtime, there's a premium on people who are finding out new stuff. You know, people who've got the time and the perseverance to find out new stuff. And there's no shortage of things to write about. I mean, there's major scandals waiting to be uncovered in all sorts of areas of public life in Australia, in my opinion. We've seen thousands of journalists lose their jobs over the last 5 or 6 years. All of those people were reporting on things. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity, actually, particularly at this point in the sort of business cycle of news, where things are maybe have finally bottomed out, perhaps, and are about to sort of trend back upwards.
And there's also like such a large variety of places to get them published. You know, like you open up the Saturday paper and there's a new face in it every week with a great story. There's, you know, great independent media who is desperate for good content, and they'll probably pay you if you're lucky, you know. And, you know, like, look at something like New Matilda. They get huge traction on their stories, you know, and they're really, you know, running on the memory of an oily rag, you know. So
we never had it in the first place. It's more the dream of an oily rag, I think.
And so, like, you know, if you spend, like, some of your time just plugging away at a yarn that you might have got a tip off or that you've dug around, you know, there is opportunity to break it, and break it in a way that can make an impact, you know, and build your name.
Well, worst case scenario, publish it yourself. Create your own media organisation and publish it yourself. You'd be surprised how impressed, if you are actually gunning for, you know, a job with another media organisation, to go into an interview and be like, hey, here's my own that I created, that I regularly update, and this is a story I broke. People are incredibly impressed by that.
Well, that's a good point, Kirsten, because I was having a conversation with a senior editor from the Herald Sun a week or so ago, and they said, look, it used to be the case that you'd have to come into a job interview with a portfolio, and that would be testament to your capacity to produce journalism. But nowadays that isn't enough, because not only do you have to have a portfolio, you've got to show that you're connected to an audience. You've built an audience, so they're interested in knowing how many followers you've got on Twitter and how many likes you've got on Facebook. And the capacity to create an audience yourself is so important now.
Yeah, Twitter's just so indispensable as a skill to have. It's, you know, even if it's just tweeting about The Bachelor, you're still building an audience, you know, and it's still, like, whatever the number is on your followers, as long as you're building it, it's very important to have, because news organisations want you to share the stuff that you're writing for them through your own distribution channel, because, you know, so few people go through the front page. You know.
What's a respectable number of followers now on Twitter?
Ask these two.
How many have you got to have to be credible in a job interview?
I honestly couldn't tell you to be credible. Look, I would hope that it's not about how many Twitter followers you have, because I think it should be about the skills that you have and the abilities that you have. Maybe you've been, you know, on a desert island for the last 3 years, you know, like that shouldn't mean, in my opinion, that you can't get a job because you haven't been constantly updating your social media feeds.
Especially because you should have some good stories if you've been on a desert island for 3 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. 5 coconut recipes to die for. See, done this before.
If you're the only one on the island, there'll be a few too many eye references probably, which probably won't go down so well.
I mean, I treat my Twitter feed as, I guess, a curated news feed. So I try to provide my followers with a mix of, you know, random comments like everyone else, but also a lot of links to articles that I'm reading, research that I'm doing. Try to provide a meaningful feed, I guess, so that there's things that the theoretical follower out there who was, you know, saw a tweet from me, that they might find that interesting. You know, it might be like macroeconomics, it might be a story from Latika Burke this morning, it might be, you know, it might well be a link to one of my own articles, but I think it should be more than simply a vanity feed that just tweets out your own stuff. It should be, ideally, a genuine engagement with your social media audience.
Well, the whole thing is about finding a community, because when you write a story, it is for a specific community. And if you are on a desert island, you should be connecting with other people who have an interest in desert islands. So even if you have like 20 followers, you know, they're an engaged following on your Twitter for desert island stories, you know, and the whole thing is about sort of like showing that you have an area of interest. And if you have been creating content for people who are really into desert islands, you know, you're going to get a job at the Desert Island Herald, you know, sooner or later. You know, I think it's important to be connecting with people who are interested in the same things as you.
I'd love to see the business model for the Desert Island Daily. I think it's going to struggle, I think.
But I also think Twitter's so much more than a platform where you can push out stories. Like, it's about getting them in as well. Like, you can, Twitter is and Facebook and Instagram and everything is like a gold mine of stories just waiting to happen. And you've just got to kind of sift through all the stuff that's a bit of nonsense to get a good story, and they are there. So it's kind of like you get it in off Twitter, you produce it, and then you push it back out to Twitter again, and it's a full cycle.
Yeah, and it's a learning opportunity. Like, look at the people who really use social media really well, like Mark DiStefano, you know, people like that. I think you can learn a lot from the way that they've pioneered and developed the use of social media as a genuine news platform.
I've seen some really clever journalists mine Twitter for, like, they have a vague idea for a story in their head and have gone and found it on Twitter and reached out to those people and created a story out of that. So, yeah, I think I'd probably use it more as to get something out rather than put it out. But
okay, so using it to crowdsource stories is important. We've touched on this idea of writing on areas that you're interested in and have a specialty in as a way of breaking stories. Is it that easy? How do you go about breaking a story when you're not inside a newsroom, when you're operating independently and you're trying to pitch stuff to people?
I remember one of my assignments, my first year of Master of Journalism, was to break a news story, and it drove me insane. I cried a lot, and I was like, how on earth? And I honestly remember walking up and down hoping I would see a car crash. I'm not even joking. I was really hoping that something terrible would happen. It's really hard. You just have to, I don't know, look where other people aren't looking. that's the best advice I can give.
I totally agree. As someone who I'm a general news reporter, so we have a newsroom full of journos that have specific rounds, and within those rounds they know everyone that they should know and have all of their contacts. So if something's going on, their contacts are going to call that journo from that round. So as a general news reporter, I always try and look in the little gaps between the journalists who have rounds, or between the business and data and arts and all of those
guys. So you are
guys.
consciously looking where others are not operating?
Well, I just figure I have good faith in my colleagues that they're going to be over their patches, so I just need to find the little bits in the middle, and often that might be quirky little stories, but quirky little stories sometimes do better online than your serious politics yarns these days, so you can actually get some pretty good traction off ridiculous stories.
Michael, within the business round, I know this as a former business reporter, there are lots of stories that don't even get touched. Is that your experience?
There is, but being in a small group, I have to cover all the main ones as well. But there's so much information out there that's publicly available that, you know, there are 1,200 listed companies on the stock exchange, and they have to report everything that they do. And there's databases for things like the Property Council, there's government databases for other information. There's just so much information that you connect, you know, who owns this company, who's giving money there, and everything like that, that all the resources are there and it's all free to access. And things like FOI documents can be lodged with any government bureau. So there's a whole bunch of relationships to be exposed in that area. And you just have to go digging or just learn a space thoroughly so that if something does happen, then you know why it's important and how to tell that to your audience, I guess.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about how to maximise the opportunity of being at university. Kirsten, you said get published. I would add to that, learn the skills of being able to access publicly available documents, because nobody else is accessing. They're all there available, and very few people are actually going and looking for that publicly available information.
Yeah, it's also hard to know what to look for in the first case, but it's just getting to know the area really well and just trial and error. Like, some people pay like $300 to go to a weekend course on like how to lodge an FOI document, but the instructions there online, and all you have to do is send a couple of emails, and it's the people's job to respond to it. So you're not bugging them really, you know, they have to do the job, and just send as many as you want. Send one a week or something like that, just until you get, you know, a sentence of information that's sort of interesting, you know. But it's just about learning how to use these tools that are available.
Yeah, but let's be frank, like most breaking stories come from sources. So, I mean, I think if you're going to work to break a story, you do need to find, you need to pick a target, obviously, but in order to then get that story, I think the most important thing is to find the people, the human intelligence.
So that reiterates the point that's often made, is start building a contact base and maintain it like it matters, because in fact it does, it really matters.
And a good way to do that when you're at uni is talk to your lecturers, and because I have a good relationship with a number of lecturers or tutors that I had at uni who are now, they may have been teaching at that time, but they've now moved back into journalism, so they might be producers or writers or journalists. And if you can just keep their number and catch up for a coffee, or I bump into them quite often at jobs, you can kind of keep that relationship. And even a couple of weeks ago, one of my old lecturers who's now a TV producer gave me a call and said, this story isn't quite right for me, but I think it might be good for you. So that's one way that you can walk into class and get a few new contacts straight off the bat.
Okay, you break a story, you've happened upon something that's worth telling. How do you cold call an editor? How do you make that pitch, that initial approach as an outsider?
Don't call them. Definitely don't call them.
Don't call.
Don't call an editor. Email an editor. Yeah. And I think it should be a very short email generally. Hi, this is me. You probably don't know me, but I've got a story that I think you might be interested in. Here's a couple of sentences that explain it. And if you can't explain why your story is important in a couple of sentences, then you're not going to get it published anyway.
Any other advice? Mistakes made? Have you done it the wrong way?
probably have, to be honest.
This is the pregnant pause bit, waiting to see if anyone's going to admit.
I think I've started probably many pitches, already in jobs, but pitches for stories where I wasn't really sure what it was before I started to talk. And I guess now being a data journalist, a lot of the problem is that I've noticed in the last couple of months, is you pitch a story and then you go and actually look at the data after you've got the green light and you realise it's not a story. So my advice would maybe be to just, do your research before you put it in front of someone's face, because often either you won't give it a good enough run, or the opposite will happen. They'll say, yeah, that's fantastic, we want, this is a great story to run in the weekend paper, and then you'll go back and look at the numbers and it won't actually stand up. So be confident that it's going to stand up before you open your mouth would be my advice.
But even if it doesn't, you still come to them with the idea and they say, well, that's all right, but how about you do this with it instead? And then it's all a learning process about what you did the first time. Because I've had yarns that have just like sort of fallen flat, when I've worked out that it's not really a good, worth printing story. But I've learned a lot about how to create that story in the first place, and then it's channeled through another funnel and it's given a new breath of life as something else. And so I think it's just about, also showing that you're keen to dig through things and then, have them turn into something else when the data you have is sort of useful as well. Yeah,
it goes kind of with that idea of bluff, doesn't it? That with that comes a degree of confidence, but the confidence is also got to be matched with the hide of being able to get back, into something after you've had a bit of a setback. So not taking it too personally, weathering it and moving on and learning from it.
I think that's probably some really good advice in general for being a journalist, is to not take anything too personally. Especially if you ever read your own comments. It's never a good idea. Just don't do it.
Yeah,
I sometimes prefer to think of it not so much as confidence, because I'm a bit of a bumbly person. Like, there's a reason I'm a print reporter and not on TV or radio. Like, I'm quite a fumbly person who's not particularly confident, but what does make me more confident is doing the preparation of knowing I have a solid story. I might jot down a first few parts if I'm going to go and pitch it to somebody who I know is very time poor. So I've done all of that, so then I can walk up to someone and say, I have the confidence to say I've got a really good story here, and if they say it's not quite right, I can keep it in my memory bank, because a month down the track there might be some other little thing that happens that now makes that story really relevant or important.
Yeah, I once got told by an editor of a reasonably high-profile monthly publication that, quote, "We just don't think you've got it in you, Eltham." You get these comments sometimes. I think that, if you're worried about that stuff, then you wouldn't be in this game, really. I mean, I actually really like getting angry phone calls from, aggrieved media officers and spinners, because that's when I know that, generally, if they're pissed off, then you've probably written a good article.
Yeah.
If someone's taken the time to ring you up and just give you an earful, it's probably a good sign,
So having a bit of attitude doesn't hurt in this job.
I mean, I don't consider myself to have attitude. It's just that I like annoying people, I guess.
I reckon that's almost the definition of having attitude. Okay, you've pitched this story, they like it, they're going to run it, but they don't want to pay you. What do? Now, as people starting out, this is something you're going to encounter, doing work for free.
It's tough. It's tough because once you start doing it for free, it's very hard to start charging those same people, I think. I had quite a few friends who are going through this at the moment, and the advice that I gave them was you have to decide what's more important in this particular publication. It might be a fantastic publication that you are absolutely, in love with and you'd love to see your name in it, and they're not going to pay you, okay. If it's something less that you're, less gunning for, maybe hold on to your words and wait for someone to actually offer to pay you for it. I think you have to really balance how much it's worth it.
Now, Ben, I know you've said very recently, as recently as about an hour and a half ago, that people shouldn't do work they're not being paid for.
Yes, broadly, I believe that's true. You shouldn't write for free. There are some, I think there's some caveats to that. I mean, if you're starting out, I think most journalists do do a bit of free writing or a bit of free media when they're starting out. And I guess it's a case-by-case scenario. But yeah, on the whole, I believe that if you're good enough to get published, if you're good enough to be in that publication with other people who are all getting paid, then you should get paid too. So, perhaps you might pitch something and you might not get paid for the first piece. But I think where possible, you should do yourself the favour of having the conversation with the editor up front and saying, okay, you really like the piece, can you let me know what your rate is?
But it's the dilemma, isn't it? You want profile, you need profile to advance and to get a job, but also you want to be paid at a respectable rate at some point before too long.
Yeah, it's hard because journalism is very important, but it's not especially valued, and even inside one's own organisation, it's not particularly well paid. But good journalism is incredibly valued, and people will pay good money for good journalism. And so a lot of people won't get paid for comment because it's cheap to produce and everyone has opinions. If you can write great comment, great, you can monetize that very easily. So I think that you should really focus on, knowing something incredibly well, then trying to get something that you've written, in a couple of hours just off your head published. There's a difference between the two. Look, not all writing is the same, and it's not going to be priced the same either.
While people aren't paying you at the rate that you want, should you be doing other kinds of writing work for organisations that may or may not be journalism, like outfits?
Like what?
PR work.
Oh. I think to varying degrees, yes. If you can get paid work doing PR, it's a great way to build contacts. There's like a huge revolving door between journalism and PR. I saw Sarah Ferguson last night tell everyone in the audience quite specifically not to do PR ever. But I don't think a lot of other people have the sort of ability to turn down rent. I think doing a broad range of work is never a bad thing.
There is the argument that says that the best journalists are people who've done a stint in PR because they understand the dynamic and they get to see how it works from the other side.
The best PR people are definitely people that are ex-journalists.
Well, that's true too. So is it something you'd encourage, doing corporate writing, for example, as a way of building your skills as a writer?
I think doing anything is better than doing nothing. I think if you can walk into a job interview or wherever and say, hey, this might not ideally be the resume that you want, but look at all these different things that I've had a go at, I've done, I'm diverse. I think that's better than just going in with nothing on your resume because you couldn't get exactly what you wanted.
And you also learn the stupidest things that you would never learn without having done that, but that's incredibly valuable skill to have, is to know these things that other people don't.
Yeah.
Hello. Hey guys, thanks for a great conversation. You've talked a bit about science journalism. I'm just wondering if you'd have any advice for medical journalism, the need, the interest, and kind of where to start.
There's a very great need, I believe. I was just talking to the media officer for Catherine King a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me that there's only a couple of full-time health journalists working in the Australian media at the moment. So, I think there's some very, very big issues in health, particularly with the current government. My advice would be similar to what I said, research a story, try and break a story. I've only done a little bit of health journalism myself, but I've done enough this year to know that there's some very, very dodgy stuff going on in the transition between Medicare locals and primary health networks, for example. I think there's a bunch of stuff happening in the mental health space. So, my advice would be to go forth and do some. We need more of it.
There's a question there.
I'm almost at the end of my journalism degree, but this year when I've been writing stories, I found that as soon as you say you're a student journalist, people won't talk to you. Do you have any advice for getting around that?
Say you're a freelance journalist.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say you're a freelance journalist.
Or have a publication at your university in mind that you're writing the story for, so it will be published. But nevertheless, it is often important to give that qualification, isn't it, that you are a student journalist. I look on it slightly differently. Sometimes that's a really good training process for what it's like when you're out there asking questions when you're in a paid position, where it's much easier to get people to answer. If you've done the hard yards on the way up, then you know a lot more of the skills required to get difficult interviews.
Yeah, look, no one calls New Matilda back. Don't worry about that. So. It's not just students.
Yeah, I thought when I was at uni that somehow when you were working for a certain publication and you rang the same people and said, you know, I'm an e-corp, but I promise I'm now a real reporter, like I've got a full-time job. I thought it would be a lot easier to sometimes get comments. And it's really not sometimes. Like sometimes people just don't want to talk to you and you just got to give it a crack really and convince them that you're going to do the story anyway, and they might look a bit silly if they don't give you a comment or something.
But there are some organisations, I remember ringing the ABS and saying I was a student, and they say we don't give comments to students, which seems absolutely ridiculous. Any government body. So, I mean, it's saying you're a freelance journalist isn't a lie. You could be getting this published somewhere, so it might be a way to get around that.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where sometimes PR people and spinners can be your friend. There is a person in most organisations whose job it is to field media inquiries, and it's generally a good idea to try and find that person and then make their life hell. So that eventually they just crack under the pressure and finally get you some comment.
In a professional and ethical way, of course.
That's right, in a persistent and entirely ethical way.
There's a question there.
Hi, I also learnt something I'm in the last throes of my undergraduate degree as well, and something that I've learnt is the skills that you need have to be more wide and varied and not necessarily focused on writing. For example, I've learned a lot about TV in the last year, learning a lot about audio, learning a lot about multimedia journalism. How important was learning things like that in your undergraduate career, undergraduate education?
I had those skills a little bit before, but they were definitely hugely important to me getting jobs, like hugely important. I think the reason that people looked at my resume for a second longer was because I had those skills. But I'm going to say don't discount writing, and it's because Jen's sitting in the front row there. But it's great to have those extra skills, but you need to have fantastic writing, like really solid writing skills in pretty much any
Writing
job.
is the foundation, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's also true that you won't get a gig, you won't get an interview at Leader, for example, now without being bi or tri or multimedia skilled.
Yeah.
You cannot just be a writer, but you've got to be a very good writer.
And talk those skills up if you have them.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't... Oh, sorry, just quickly. I mean, I didn't have any broadcast media skills at all. So I just went out and taught myself. I decided to start a podcast, and I did a podcast with Amber Jamison, who was at Crikey at the time. So, I mean, nothing is stopping you from just going out and teaching yourself some of this stuff.
And some of it's quite like things you might be, sorry, I
That's
keep
all right,
jumping
no,
in.
that's okay.
Things that you might be using in your daily life anyway. Like I know now a lot of US media organisations are using Snapchat as a great way for getting news out there, and a lot of journos with recent riots have been having huge Snapchat engagement with people, or Periscope. So it might not be the traditional broadcast that you're doing anymore, but you can be... One of my colleagues was at a protest in Bendigo and had thousands of people watching her Periscope, and that's kind of a cool way to broadcast. So you can always just give it a go.
There's a question here.
Thank you. My question is actually for you, because you did say that you had some experience in production and all that kind of thing. I'm actually wanting to get into documentary work eventually. I'm also at the end of my degree, and I was just kind of wanting to know the best way to go about that and to build contacts in that industry, because it seems to be almost quite separate to the main journalism stream.
Definitely, and I don't know how well I can answer it, because ideally I'd like to make documentaries one day too, so when we find out we can both know. But I think, I do think working as a journalist is really, really good for having done film and now doing journalism. I think those skills complement each other very well, and I think to do really good documentaries, it's great to have the things that you learn in journalism, like ethics and interview skills and a lot of, how to do production and that sort of thing. the advice that I've talked to a lot of people who do documentaries to sort of ask them, how do you crack into this? The advice that I've gotten is just do them. And I know that that's not great advice, but literally just go take your iPhone and go and interview somebody that you think is interesting and cut up a little 5-minute iPhone video about that person and what they do. And it's a good start, and it might interest people to pay you money to do it. But it's also really just good to hone your skills. And I think that's probably a point that we were just mentioning, that you don't need a big camera anymore. You don't need a lot of equipment. You can just do it on your iPhone. And
I don't know why that's bad advice. I think that's really the only advice, isn't
just do it.
The way to do it is not to think about having a job eventually. It's about doing the thing that you love now. It's the only way into work. No one is going to give you a job as a documentary maker if you haven't made them.
Yeah.
No one.
I reckon it would be good to have a mate, because it is still pretty hard to do video totally solo.
We should talk.
Yeah. Even just some of a second camera, so you can get like noddies and cutaways and things like that. It makes such a difference to the finished product, doesn't it?
There's a question here at the front. Just wait, if you wouldn't mind, for the mic, please.
Hi, I'm linking up with the earlier question about health and medical journalism, and I was interested that you consider that there are very few real medical journalists in Australia today. I'm familiar with the work of a few, and I think that from examining their backgrounds, etc., they don't look overqualified for that role. The colossal number of incredibly important stories in the health sector and a huge number of vested interests dominating the debate. There is a huge need for a very knowledgeable person to advocate for a whole lot of incredibly powerful human interest stories, issues touching on social justice, access to healthcare, mental health system, misdiagnosis, you name it. An endless list, and potentially everyone in the country is affected by it sooner or later. So I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, because I've spent several years researching it in great detail from the point of view of advocacy for people who have been harmed, and those stories don't get out.
You've made the very strong case there for the importance of specialist knowledge in journalism, and underscoring the fact that there are not enough qualified journalists in that field and in others. Journalists tend to be generalists. So a sure way into work is to become a specialist, isn't it?
It certainly helped me. I've long nurtured a very niche specialty in arts journalism. For a long time I wondered exactly why I was doing that. But it's paid off this year with some very, very big events happening in the sort of arts policy space with the former Minister George Brandis. And then all of a sudden I found myself basically being kind of the only arts journalist working in the country on that story. So, yeah, I think if you've got a specialist knowledge, it can be really, really powerful and important.
And in that way, you also there's two sides to it, because when you are so knowledgeable about an area, or you have niche knowledge, you can become blinkered by it. So if a generalist is covering the health sector and they have the context, that's also good if they don't have the best scientific knowledge, because they'll ask the right questions, which a doctor writing for a general public might not be able to explain in the best way. So I think to see the journalists...
who is a doctor who writes extremely well for the public. Don't know whether you follow her. She's published in the Guardian all the time.
I really like her work. Yeah.
So and a way around this is to have the humility as a generalist to be able to access those that have the interpretive skills to help you get across a specialist area. In fact, that is a skill of journalism, isn't it? Tapping into other people's expertise in order to do your job well.
Yeah, one of the first things I got taught was, if I didn't understand something, just call someone up who would be able to explain it to you, which is, a skill that journalists have these skills which are incredibly valued, just about how to find information and get it across. So I agree that we do need more health reporters. But
we have time for one more quick question if someone has one. Yes, here at the front. Microphone. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. I'm in the first year of my degree, and I find that I sometimes experience writer's block. Do you ever still get that, and what sort of tips do you have to get over that in the industry?
Every time. Every time. I don't know. I don't know if there is a tip. I think it's called deadline pressure, isn't it? Yeah, it's called paying the rent for me. If I don't write the article, I literally don't get paid as a freelancer. So that's a powerful motivator.
I think part of the answer is the more of it you do, the better. Just keep writing. And it's a skill that you can get rusty at. So keeping on writing is a way around writer's block, I think, for me.
And if you're staring at a blank page and not being able to get anywhere, go for a read, you know. It's like you're not going to break through the wall just by sitting there and looking at it. It's like reading is the best way to just start generating ideas again.
And one of my favourite journos who I really look up to once told me that his office is just full of books and papers and of things that he loves, and he gets writer's blocks, and you know, sometimes if he can't find inspiration, he'll go and read a few things like Michael just said, and it won't be relevant, but it might tick something that he goes, oh, I can do that, and finds the lead.
I wonder if we could do this. We've got 2 minutes and we've got to wrap up. If you were to sum up in a sentence the key bit of advice for somebody getting into journalism, what would it be? Really should have given you some notice on that, shouldn't I? We've heard lots of useful things here today.
My advice is don't boil everything down to just the most important thing. No, that's not actually it.
Fair call.
As I said in my previous panel, perseverance, in my opinion, is the most important thing. Just keeping on, you know, work hard. Over a long time, you'll eventually get better at it. People will start to notice you.
I don't need to force the rest of you unless you've got something you want to say.
Yeah, the most recent piece of advice I got from my editor was just to be patient and to wait, you know, because you do a lot of hard work and you will get noticed. Just pretty much on the same line. Just keep plugging away, really, and effort.
Yeah, you never know who's going to, in my experience, you never know who's going to call you a year down the track and say, oh, I saw this one piece that you wrote, or, you know, I worked with you here, and then offer you a job. So just, yeah, I guess just work hard and people will notice you and try to impress those people.
Well, please join me in thanking Monique Hoare, Michael Roddan, Kirsten, Robb and Ben Eltham.